So, hello and welcome to another episode of Flying High with Flutter. I'm your host, allenwyma. Just a quick shout out. So, if anybody listening to the show is interested in some help in Elixir, Flutter, or Rust, go ahead and reach out to us. The podcast is sponsored by Plangora, which is my company that we do consulting work in those three technologies. So, go ahead and check out our website at www.plangora.com. That's plangora.com. And get in contact with us. We'll see if we can help you out. But anyways, back to the show. We have a really wonderful, very friendly guest who I just found out is Canadian. That's why he must be so friendly. Hugh Strange, who is sorry, I forgot your position, but you're working over at Nubank. Maybe you can go ahead and introduce yourself to kind of let people know, more about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Hugh Strange. I'm a VP of product here at Nubank. I've been with the company basically since the early days, joined in 2014 when we were just starting out as a fledgling credit card company here in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and I've been with the company since then. And we now have grown to be a multi-product, multi-geo, basically digital bank. And still focusing most of my time on evolving our product experience. And today I spend the bulk of my time on our mobile app. So evolving basically the mobile app as a platform so that it can support all the various products that we have here in Brazil, as well as Mexico and Colombia. And that's why I have at least a little experience with Flutter as it's the you know primary and soon to become the only framework that we use here at Nubank, evolving our mobile application.
Well, soon to be only, yeah. I remember you guys do a lot of, you guys have a lot of churn in your technology stack, right? So, and you've been there since nearly the beginning, or actually the beginning.
Since probably about 10 engineers or so in a house here in Sao Paulo. So I'm not saying I would say churn. I would say we, and I can go as deep into this story as you want, but I would say on the mobile side, we've been in through a few phases, and back when we were just a credit card company with a single product, I think the way that we did mobile development was adequate. But then, as we moved more into multi-product and as we scaled the company, it became clear that we needed to do things a little bit differently. And so we've we've pivoted, I guess, a couple times. The technologies that we use and sort of our general approach to mobile development over the years, in order to better adapt to the demands of the business. And I think you know the 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 way that we came to sort of take a deeper look at Flutter was basically we were finding that our mobile development pipeline was becoming increasingly a bottleneck for several reasons. Some of it was people. Some of it was just finding enough kind of native developers. Some of it was the constraints of the stores. Waiting for things to get reviewed in the sort of the iOS store. Waiting for things to kind of ultimately kind of get rolled out. And there was also some issues around uh, different teams within Nubank kind of reinventing the wheel, and therefore not really having a very efficient process for kind of getting things into the app. And so what actually happened, this was kind of back in 2015 and 2016, is one of our teams started testing React Native, and actually liked a lot of the properties of being able to develop something once for both platforms, having sort of a technology that was a bit more accessible to non-mobile developers. And it created a bit of friction within Nubank, because obviously we still had our sort of the way we've been doing mobile traditionally in one part of the business, and then we had this new team that was experimenting with React Native, and it caused us to take a bit of a step back and say, look, we can't have, to your point around churn, we can't have sort of different philosophies floating around. And so we decided to basically reevaluate entirely what we wanted to do, and ultimately decided to go with Flutter. And so that's been the philosophy since about 2019. Obviously, because we have a lot of sort of uh, tech, you know, legacy code that's sitting out there. We're not kind of fully done this transition. We still have plenty of native code in the app. We still have a bit of React Native as well. But the idea is to move the entire company onto Flutter, and then use that as kind of the dominant, the primary framework, such that we can enjoy, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, but enjoy a lot of the benefits for both customers and for us as a company that we think that this can provide.
I would love it to have your developers on to talk about how it is to have native, React Native and Flutter in one app. Just to me, it's just hard to figure out what kind of build system that would be. But I guess it's possible as you guys do it, right?
Yeah, and it creates a lot of different challenges. I mean, just another one that we face from the product side is it's not that easy to get very clean metrics, because the app is instrumented in different ways depending on what part of it you're talking about. So it's actually one of the ways that we're to some extent selling kind of sort of Flutter to parts of the organization. We're saying, look, um, once we can kind of get everybody on a common platform, uh, we can start to do things like add, standard instrumentation, make sure that our design system is incorporated as well. And there's a lot of benefits in terms of making different product teams across the company, giving them the tools basically to to do things more efficiently. It comes back to this issue I was mentioning about different teams at Nubank kind of reinventing the wheel. uh, we would have people instrumenting things in different ways, designing things in different ways. And for a lot of the screens in our app today, they're not extremely complex. I mean, one of the things we're trying to do with our experience is to make it very simple for users. So you want kind of standard buttons, you want simple, clean screens, and these are things that I think we can systematize and free up our developers and product managers to be doing the more complex things, or to be focused on how to experiment and make things better. And so I think there's just a lot of benefits in terms of increased productivity and standardization of the experience and consistency.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty interesting. I think it's a good idea to let developers kind of go and experiment and see what kind of works out for them. But I mean, we always hear about like React Native versus Flutter, and people have their sides of the camp, right? Um, like if you went from native to React Native and then now converting slowly over to Flutter, like what is it that really made you guys to say, hey, you know what, this is what we want to do. We want to actually just convert everything over. What is it that was kind of like really the biggest thing that could cause this kind of reaction?
Yeah. So just to be clear, it's not that we were kind of fully native and then fully React Native and now going to Flutter. It's more that um, we had a team, perhaps a couple of teams that had started to experiment with React Native and sort of liked the concept, to some degree the experience of kind of hybrid development. And uh, it basically prompted this conversation, that maybe we should take a step back and think about, should this be the model for all of Nubank, and if so, what should we use? And there's a blog post that a couple of our engineers wrote about this, which is basically about the decision process of, we had decided basically we wanted to use one of these frameworks, but we did go through a selection process as to which one to use. And React Native was one of the options for sure. We were already using it in some places. Flutter was another one. I believe Kotlin Native was the third. And we ultimately decided, kind of in that process, to go with Flutter. And there was a lot of time spent on that selection process. Um, I do think where Flutter tended to win out was just the experience of working with it, for the developers. But I also think there was an element of it that was new, and to some extent, it was also just something fresh. There was kind of a React Native camp, there was a native camp, and so maybe Flutter actually had a bit of a neutral quality to it, such that we could kind of start with something that was, to some degree, fresh, and that the whole organization could get behind. Because something that definitely wasn't obvious to me as a product manager is that people have very, very strong feelings on this subject, especially the mobile developers, and we obviously wanted to respect that. And so, we wanted to do, essentially have a process that, there was some fairness involved, and that people's voices were heard, and that actually was objective in the sense that you can be objective in this type of thing. So, a ranking, and I think we have some charts that sort of show how these technologies compare. Um, and I think the fact that the organization, I would say, there's always some hiccups, but the organization is pretty fully behind Flutter, and this is 2 years later, I think is a sort of testament to the fact that I think we ran that process pretty well.
So, but this must have been a process, right, where you, like, kind of were prototyping in different, languages and kind of comparing, right, and seeing what people felt like.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and there was, you know, I mean, I can find the blog post, but there was I think 7 or 8 dimensions, documentation, you know, sort of, there was some elements around like if there are changes to the iOS domain or the Android domain, sort of how problematic will that be? There was the community. Will the community be maintained? Which obviously, like with kind of Facebook and Google, I think they were pretty equal in that respect. But there were various dimensions that we looked at before deciding that ultimately this was the direction that we wanted to go.
I mean, I think a lot of this decisions came from developers, right, or how much this came outside of developers?
I mean, so I think there was the impetus for this was very much I would say kind of a CTO, CPO, CEO to some degree involved as well, push, which was we need to get faster. We had periods. I would say maybe the sort of the dark days. This is around 2017, 2018. We'd have periods where even just simple flows would potentially take over a month, maybe 2 months. And I think we just realized that that was not sustainable. And the app to some degree was, you know the product portfolio of Nubank was fast outpacing kind of the app's ability to to sort of manage these products and to be able um, to render them effectively to customers in ways that were understandable, and sort of sleek. And so it kind of became a business imperative that if we don't make it such that we can iterate more quickly on the mobile app, that's going to be a major problem. So that I think was kind of the business decision. What to use to solve that problem was very much an engineering decision. So how to kind of attack that bottleneck was up to the engineering team. However, I would say like one part of this, and I think the reason why we liked Flutter was finding something where we could potentially have a framework that the entire engineering organization found a bit more kind of accessible. And so I do think the decision to kind of stay fully native, that decision was kind of a joint engineering decision that was, we need to at least try moving away from that, because the benefit is it just gives us so much more flexibility, instead of continuing to have a bottleneck on mobile specialists. But I think the rest of this discussion, React Native versus Flutter, et cetera, primarily engineering led. Um, and I think now there's more teams that are getting, or more functions, I should say, that are getting involved in these discussions, of course, because I think they're starting to realize the power. And so now, like I think we have kind of designers, for example, asking like, oh, what can Flutter potentially do on other platforms? Can we, because we're seeing the advantage of pairing Flutter with a design system in terms of maintaining consistency across the app. So now kind of the web guys are saying, oh, well, interesting. Like how can we use this to standardize or to keep consistent all of our platforms? And so I think other functions are getting more interested now. The product managers, of course, love it because we're able to iterate much more quickly now. So now I think kind of everybody knows what's going on. But initially, the decision in terms of what framework to use was very much an engineering led one.
When you said it, like, kind of, I forgot what the term is that you use, but you're basically saying that the velocity was just not fast enough for the rest of the product at Nubank. At that time, what was it that you guys were using? Was it just a mixture of native and React Native, or like what was it at the time that was actually causing all this kind of not going fast enough?
Yeah, I mean, at that time, kind of mostly native. I mean, to some extent, the initial experimentation with React Native was a reaction to this bottleneck. It was, one of our teams saying, "We want to launch a new product. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like. We want to test things with users, and we want to test them with real users." And they didn't want to have a cycle time of 2 months for every new thing they wanted to test. And so they started to test with React Native and had actually like a very good experience with that. So to some extent, that was the first reaction to this bottleneck. And then I think the fact that we then had these parallel tracks going on caused us to want to just take a step back and reevaluate the strategy overall.
I'm guessing another problem of native is that, like, sometimes some platforms would be faster in some features than others, right? That's what I usually hear a lot.
Yes, yes.
So feature parity is definitely an issue.
hmm No, I mean, and we like we had that in some cases to some rather extensive degrees, like something on iOS. I think usually Android was ahead on most things, but we might have something on Android, for example, that would be there for 6 to 12 months, and it's such a burden on the rest of the organization. We one of Nubank's kind of pillars is having incredible customer service, and the customer service team would have to actually remember this. So you'd have someone calling in, they'd have to ask what platform they're on. They're having an issue with this. They'd have to remember that on iOS it's this way, on Android it's this way. It's an enormous hassle, and these are not platform specific things that you'd want. This would literally just be like, we weren't able to develop the feature here because we only had one iOS developer on that team, and he was busy doing this. So it does, it comes back to, again, these bottlenecks. And I'm curious, some of this may be a bit of a feature of Brazil, like maybe just not enough mobile specialists here. I'm curious, how we might have reacted if we were just awash in native specialists. I think the benefits are still there, but the people bottleneck was very significant, and it led to a lot of suboptimal outcomes for customers.
I mean, I would like to hear more about, like, what was happening on, so I think this episode is really great because we can hear more about people who are not in the tech team, right? So kind of like what was happening on, like, the outside of the tech team. I mean, you guys are saying, okay, this is just not going fast enough. We have feature imparity. We have just it's just like seems just I don't know. Maybe you guys felt it was a mess. I don't know. Maybe that's too strong of a word, but it's just not sustainable and not a good situation, right? So, like, what was the situation like on your guys' side? How were you guys feeling, and were you guys just trying to be as helpful as you can, like trying to also give some feedback, or you're just kind of stepping back and just watching what the dev team was doing?
Well, I think there's a few things. And first of all, I don't want to, I don't want to overstate anything here. There was a bottleneck. I would not say it's a mess. But the point is, uh, we we had a situation where it was very hard to get things into the app quickly, and there was a lot of contributing factors there. I think what was difficult for people who are outside of the dev organization to understand is there are there are pieces of this subject that are quite complex. Like I don't think most of our product org really, including myself, like really gets the nitty gritty of sort of what needs to happen in the mobile pipeline for something ultimately to kind of get into production. So there's obviously a bit of a hesitancy of you know not feeling comfortable in proposing a change that's this significant, because of there's a lot of things that are going very well. The app was very stable. Like our crash free rate on Android was basically 100% since 2014. iOS iOS has had its kind of ups and downs, but always been pretty good as well. So like there was a flip side to this discussion, which was we weren't evolving the app very quickly, but there was a lot of things that were working very well. And let's keep in mind also the company was exploding in growth. So there's there's kind of like you want more speed, but everything is a trade-off, right? So if it was like, yeah, you can get more speed, but for the now 10 million people who are using the app, the bill pay flow is not going to work. All right, well, maybe this speed thing is something that I don't want quite as much anymore, right? So there were a lot of things that were working well, but I think what we started to realize, and this is why kind of when it went to multi-product, it really became a thing. Like when it was just the credit card, and we're still able to kind of add some, we're able to add some new features. We're able to kind of fix some existing things, and then things like performance were going very well. I think it didn't seem to be, that much of a problem. But when it became what we needed to do a lot more things, like we needed to make space for a new program, for a new product, we needed to change the structure of the app. We needed to overhaul the design. When the backlog, I guess, like got more and more significant. Now the fact that we had a very small team that were trying to get things done, and there were long lead times on those things. I think that's when it started to be, oh wow, okay, um, this is this is tricky. And so I think the perspective from I'd say the non-technical side of the org was we want to make sure that we maintain all these things that are going well, in particular performance, but on the kind of productivity or efficiency side, we need to get to a better place.
So, were you guys also kind of taking a look to see like, how does this app feel if it's written in React Native, or how does this feel if it's written in Flutter? How does this feel if it's written in Native? Like, did you guys also get to kind of play around a little bit to see what it feels like outside of just developing in that standpoint, or you really just kind of just listening to people and
Yeah, well, so I mean, there was a time period where we basically had uh, basically this one new product that was in React Native that served essentially as a bit of a pilot for what a hybrid framework might look like. And the general perception was that it performed pretty well, that customers were having a good experience, and that there weren't too many drawbacks that we could see. And we'd been following other companies that had their own experiences. Airbnb was one that we'd looked at a number of times, that had their own experiences with hybrid, and sort of had either tested it and moved back, or had committed in some cases and hadn't. But it's very hard looking at these companies from the outside to really know what's really going on, even if you talk to them. And so I think it's one of those things that you really need to try out for yourself. And again, on the product side, is in like, can this work for customers? And ultimately, we found that it seemed to be working fine.
okay. That's good to hear. Like, it's good to hear like the on the other side, right? So when the decision finally came down, like Flutter is, what you guys think you should be getting into. You guys just kind of probably said, "Oh, that's great. All right, now can we start working on this now? Can we kind of start getting moving on a product, right?" I mean, this must have been the first kind of thought. Like, so when you start building up this app again and start working again with Flutter, um, I guess probably the follow up would be, how was it to bring new people onto this code base, right? Like, how did you feel when you're kind of managing this product?
Yeah. So I mean, it's been a longer journey than at least I anticipated. We made the decision, I think, in late 2019, although I can check this blog post. And we're kind of 2 years into it, and we're almost done. We've probably got like a couple months. When I say done, I mean sort of having sort of the whole company and the whole app onto Flutter. And the way we ended up approaching this, which I think was the right one in retrospect, is we kind of divided it into phases that we affectionately called crawl, walk, run. And in this crawl phase, there was a lot of investing in literally like, how do teams work with Flutter, including training people, including the Flutter development experience, including getting people comfortable with kind of the basics. And that took some time. That actually involved, like, I think probably about 6 months of time to kind of get people on board. And we probably didn't make our first major sort of shipping of app real estate until kind of mid of 2020, which was when we effectively kind of redid the homepage in Flutter, and then effectively kind of replicated a very similar experience with some adjustments, um, and then kind of put that out there. And then we were just kind of, it was a bit terrifying, because it was a major change, for a technological change at least. And the number of customers we had at the time was probably about 30 million. So you're shipping this thing to like a very massive number of people. And we couldn't find a ton of people in the world that were using Flutter at this scale. And so we kind of put it out there, and it performed perfectly fine, and the company gradually got more and more kind of comfortable with with making similar changes. And so I'd say that that was kind of the step into, say, the walk phase. And then we started to work very closely with other teams, and first focused on new features. So if you're putting something new into the app, do that in Flutter, which eventually became kind of a effectively a mandate of the company. And over time, most teams, and again, the training was happening in tandem. There's like most kind of I guess like adoption curves. There's sort of the evangelists that are now convincing kind of the rest of the company that, like, this works, this is good. And in tandem, I think more and more of the company was getting on board and feeling more comfortable. I think the underlying kind of investments in documentation and the development experience, et cetera, were also evolving. And so it started to gain momentum. And then where we're kind of getting to today is there's all this legacy, and so it's now migrating the rest of the app onto Flutter as well, and kind of chipping away at that, such that we eventually can get to a fully Flutter experience. But it's been a long journey, and there it definitely has required investments at sort of multiple levels of the organization, including everything I was just naming, training, you name it. And I think we're at a space now where we have a lot of people in the company who are very, very sort of familiar with this, and realizing sort of how useful it is. And what's been fun, I guess, in the last maybe 6 months is starting to some extent kind of pair Flutter with other things that we want to systematize. So I mentioned kind of the design system, but also standardized instrumentation, error handling. We're even starting to basically uh, provide teams with what we call kind of backend driven content, which is basically like everything in a kind of a package, such that you can essentially just like ship a standardized flow from the backend without needing to kind of sort of reconfigure very much at all. And so I think what I would hope to see is just there's some sort of massive drops in sort of cycle time from. And when I say cycle time, I don't mean just like sort of development cycle time, like sort of I have an idea, I would like to put this in the app cycle time, so like the whole thing. And hopefully we'd see these very, very significant productivity gains, because all across the company now, like if you're doing anything that is pretty standard, you should be able to do it with some of these tools.
Has Flutter actually opened up some new dimensions for you guys that you guys are saying, okay, when we're using, even native, has there anything kind of stopped you? Like for what I can say is like I know that when I was trying to go native, I couldn't build some very customized components because of it. Like there's some very interesting designs that people wanted to give me, but I just couldn't figure out how the heck to build that. What about, is there anything that's really opened up your guys' horizon because of going with Flutter?
In terms of functionality, it's a good question. There might be some there might be a couple of examples there, but I can't think of any offhand. I do think that it, and again, I mean, I don't mean to sort of keep harping on speed and consistency, but I do think that I'm looking forward to what our development teams are going to do with all this extra time. Like there was just a lot of duplication of effort going on in the past, and so in theory, there should be more time for discovery. There should be more time to sort of to play around with all the things that Flutter can do. But in terms of specific instances, I'm not sure I can think of anything in terms of functionality today. But again, our our app today is, I think, is just starting to skim the surface of starting to do, kind of very, uh, let's call them like interesting things, right? Like we have very little animation today. We have kind of, some basic kind of visual flourishes. We're just starting to get into playing around with different themes, just starting to get into motion. So I think What we're providing to customers today is, I wouldn't call it basic, but I would say it's relatively straightforward. And so I think as we start to move into sort of more interesting, visual patterns and such things, I think we'll be in a interesting position to leverage more of what Flutter can do.
That's quite interesting because I think it's something that Flutter really flourishes at. You guys don't have much animations. Is that something that just was never thought about? Was just adding more and more features, but not like making it more, I don't know, attractive or interesting when you're kind of doing certain actions?
Yeah, we it's funny. I mean, to some degree, it does come back a bit to the bottleneck discussion, right? It's like if you're very resource constrained, and you're trying to evaluate between additional visual polish, for example, and a new feature, uh, you'll often go for the latter, much to the consternation of our design team. But some of it might have been just we might have just underinvested there, to be honest. So we're playing catch up to some degree, but we've got a lot of good stuff in the works. I can tell you that.
I'm also kind of curious about like, is there anything coming like feedback from designers about how it's been to work with it? Because I mean, to me, it's like I feel like I can get really picture perfect. I don't know if like designers had any kind of feelings about switching the technology around, see if they can get more interesting designs.
Yeah, so there's definitely a bit of that, but I think the overwhelming response from designers is around consistency. I mean, the ability for us to basically create standardized components. Um, it's just like this huge relief. I mean, we still have we have a large selection of sort of button sizes, an unnecessary number of fonts. I mean, just the sort of the proliferation, and some of this, is not a technological issue. I mean, maybe we just should have had better governance on the design system side. But I think the fact that we can you know pair this with a design system is very, very compelling to the designers, and I think they're loving the fact that we can move into a more consistent world.
What about the head honcho, the CEO, right? How does he feel about going with Flutter? I mean, it must be pretty happy that you guys are really the velocity's picked up, right?
Yeah, I mean, for him, it'll be the productivity gains for sure. Consistency as well, though. I don't think any CEO wants an app to look like Frankenstein. Um, and we're interested, of course, in maintaining a very high level of performance. So, I mean, one thing I'm excited about getting really nice standardized metrics is we can have very good, clean numbers around loading times, crashes, etc. So I would say um, y- you know if he gets huge productivity gains, increasing consistency, and great performance, I mean, what CEO wouldn't want that, right?
Yeah, definitely. How was actually? I'm kind of curious about like how was his feeling when you guys launched this app that was in had some pieces in Flutter? Like, was he just also kind of nervous? I mean, at 30 million customers using this app is a very big gamble, right? You can really make a big dent in your business.
Yeah, I mean, we yeah, I think we did all the standard kind of rollout things you would do for such a thing. So I mean, we instrumented it quite well. We had a holdout for a while because, like anything with like a credit fintech, you need to worry about, need to worry about credit impacts. And we were just very, very careful. But I think after we made the change on the homepage, then I think everybody got a lot more comfortable. I think that was, I think, at least for me, that was the big first step. Because prior to that, it's you play around with a screen or with a feature. It's not really it's not a macro change that could really alter things. Once we did the homepage, I think then we got a lot more comfortable around the technology, and then we did another kind of major change to the homepage where we also adjusted the visuals as well. And then I think that kind of okay, so we can make major design changes, we can make a major technology change. We're heading in the right direction.
I mean, switching to Flutter too is also quite interesting because it also opens up more avenues for you guys, right? So, I mean, now you have the option to export to new platforms that you didn't have before. Um, is that something that Nubank is also taking a look at? Because I mean, maybe it is useful to be able to interact with your bank with the desktop app or even on the web.
Yeah, yeah. It's a it's kind of a something that I'd say is on the backlog at this point, but we want to get to. We know we are especially with the new products that we have. For example, investments has a web platform already. Easy Invest is a company we acquired um, a little while ago, and now called Nuvest. And so there's an investments web platform or website, and then we also have a site, our web app for kind of the credit card product, and then we also have the various websites, marketing websites, Nubank blog, etc. Um, and naturally, I think the same challenges we faced on the app in terms of having more of a consistent unified design. The productivity issues, I would say, for web are not as much of a concern, but there is definitely this an interest, from the product team, and could we be using Flutter to go to other platforms. But I think right now the main focus is trying to kind of unify the app first, and then look towards what we could potentially do on web.
Now, besides Flutter, you guys also do some other interesting technology, right? You guys are not like traditional banks in the fact that you guys are not just using Java or something like that. What else kind of technology do you think that's really kind of helped you guys to excel in your products?
Well, it's funny, like our I don't know how much you know about like our backend story, but it's a little different than mobile because we we basically started with Clojure, um, and it was kind of mandated as the tech for like a while, in part to kind of avoid some of the issues that we had in kind of the mid years with mobile, which was that you have one team kind of doing things in a different way, and it makes it hard to onboard. It makes it hard for people to kind of understand what's happening in different teams. And so Clojure was kind of the de facto technology for a long time, and then gradually, for specific needs of different teams, we've kind of added additional languages. I mean, obviously, there's some very obvious ones like Python for machine learning, we have Scala, and a few others. And now I think it's a little bit more there's a little bit more of a proliferation, but Clojure was always kind of the core language, in part because there was just this very nice um, symbiosis with Datomic, the database we were using, and them both being kind of the I don't know what you call them, like the children, I guess, of sort of Cognitech and Rich Hickey, and sort of his team. But you know, in terms of other technologies, there we've started to kind of diversify, I guess you could call it, into some other areas over the years. But it started out as being very much standardized, just to kind of enable the company to grow quickly and enable us to onboard new people.
I think Clojure is such a odd language. Have you seen it before?
I mean, keep in mind you're talking to someone from the product side, so like we're quickly getting out of my depth here. I definitely hadn't, but also like I mean, I didn't have a ton of computer science experience to begin with. But it was weird back then. I think it's a little less weird now, but in part because like we've grown. But the thing is, it's interesting. I think it's a to some degree, I guess you could say, uh, this was not a factor in the Flutter decision, but maybe helped us get more comfortable to it. Which is, no one arrived at Nubank, or almost nobody arrived at Nubank knowing Clojure, and they grokked it, they got it right. And you could say the same thing about Flutter, Dart, and so maybe it gave us a bit more kind of confidence in developers' ability to just kind of learn new things very rapidly. But it was kind of a odd choice. But I think there's a great, if you haven't seen it, there's a great YouTube about why we chose Datomic. I think called like the nine superpowers of Datomic. This is from way back in the day with our with Ed and Lucas, one of our principal engineers, where they talk about why we chose Datomic, and it makes a ton of sense why we chose it. Um, the funny thing about sort of that discussion is, if you do zoom out though, and you're like, this will be the primary database for like an enormous bank, it's still a bit crazy, but it makes a ton of sense. And I think Clojure kind of made a lot of sense given that choice and given some other things that we wanted to do.
So if I remember correctly, like, so first of all, I mean, Clojure is a Lisp-like language, or it's basically a form of Lisp, I think.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there's this parentheses everywhere, which is just, if you look at it, you're just gonna, blow your mind. But everybody who I'd known who ever tried Lisp seems like they just can't get enough of it. They're just Lisp crazy. So it's on my list of some stuff to play with. Just haven't had a moment. But kind of going back to Datomic, I mean, Datomic. If I understand correctly, Datomic is like an append only or immutable kind of database, something like that. So that makes sense for finance, to be honest, because you don't want to be able to change things, right? If you make a mistake or something, you want to be able to just append to it, right? If you're looking at like a ledger.
Yes, exactly. You want to be able to, well, you want to be able to change things, but you want to, like, you want an audit trail, and you want to basically know, um, you want to know everything, right? And so it's, that, like, I'm trying to remember what all nine super, there was 7 or 8 or 9 superpowers, but um, it's it's a very interesting database for financial services.
Now, do you think that having Flutter and Clojure and Datomic like as open and not letting everybody know you guys working with this is actually bringing interesting talent to you guys org? That I mean, people are just saying, "I want to work with Flutter, I want to work with Clojure, etc." And they come into your organization. You think it's actually a pretty good kind of marketing tool?
Um, that's a good question. So I think, uh, I'm curious if our developers would give you a different answer. So I think the choice of, like, Datomic, and the fact that it's um, it's an interesting choice, and it's a choice it's a thoughtful choice, right? Maybe acts as like a signaling device that, this is a technology company that happens to be building a bank versus, like, a bank that has some good developers, and maybe especially in the early years, maybe that helped attract developers who are sort of interested in working in, like, a sort of a tech forward or an engineering led organization, however you want to phrase it. Um, you know, I think today, given that we're quite large, I think a lot of developers are just drawn to the fact that, like, you get to work on something of this scale, that you basically get to. I mean, there's some really really interesting challenges that, um, technical challenges that we have today, like, uh, and some of them are sort of, I would call, like, combination technical business challenges, like, can you spin up a new version of Nubank in a new country really quickly? Um, that's an interesting business challenge, but it's also, like, an interesting technical challenge, which is, how much of what we do in Nubank can be kind of platformized and globalized, such that, you can ship, like, a bank in a box, right? Like, how the fact that in Latin America, for example, there's really very very few regional banks. Like, here in Brazil, the top Brazilian banks here have almost no presence outside of Brazil, and why is that? And, if you think that, like, the technology stack can be very globalized, in theory, you should be able to kind of spin up new banks around the world relatively quickly. Now, the truth might be more in the middle. There's regulatory differences, cultural differences, you name it. But I think there's a super interesting technological challenge there. So a lot of our teams that are working on these global platforms get to work on this super interesting problem of, like, how do you basically, support Mexico or support Colombia. So, I think, I do think, people might come here for the technologies too, but I also think they come for the interesting business challenges, and hopefully for the people, which I think are great.
Yeah, so do you guys still have a very kind of open-minded kind of, let's try new stuff and see how it goes? 'Cause that seems like that's really much a core of your guys' culture.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, one thing I think is very interesting about this whole discussion, which is around the, kind of the benefits of standardization to some degree, right? Is how do you do that, but also leave some space for a team to do things in a new way. Um, and I think we very much still have this mindset. In fact, one of our values is, like, be bold and challenge the status quo. But, the status quo could be like the status quo inside of the company, right? And I think there is a little bit of a, and this is, I think, up to our engineering managers, our product managers too, is it's like, how do you find the balance between, like, healthy experimentation and kind of chaos and teams doing things in different ways? And I think at times in the past we've been maybe too far in the chaos direction. I hope that today we find that right balance, right? Um, but, I think there should be a high bar for a new product team being like, you know what, we just want to kind of go out there and build our own app in a completely new language, like, to hell with it. Um, I'm not necessarily fully against that, but I think like there should be an extremely high bar for that. On the flip side, I don't think we want to, completely constrain teams and say like, in order to do this, you can only use these tools. So I think we need to find a balance. Um, but I'm liking the benefits that we're enjoying from increased kind of standardization. I think most of the teams are too. So I guess we'll see how that evolves.
Okay. Um, yeah, I don't think I have any other kind of further questions, right? But I think I just want to know if you can kind of sum up on I mean, because how would I say this? There is some people who listen to this podcast who are not developers, right? But I think a core amount is. Um, as somebody who's not a developer yourself, right? And it's kind of from the outside looking in, and they're also on the side, like, should I go native, or I know I want to hit both platforms. Should I look at React? Should I look at Flutter? Should I look at Cordova or whatever? Like, there's still more technologies coming out all the time. Maybe you can kind of give your reasons about why you think that they should at least really take a good look at Flutter before they take a look at something else, or maybe because you guys already did some experimentation. Could you give a couple of quick points for people?
Yeah. So I mean, I guess one would be at least our developers, and some of our, I would say, like some of our best developers really seem to enjoy the experience of Flutter. And I mean, I think that says a lot. And so there's definitely uh, at least a few things that kind of this framework has gotten right in terms of just kind of making the experience of working with it good. And I don't think we wouldn't have moved in this direction if that were not true. Um, the second one is there seems to be quite a bit of momentum in terms of the Flutter community, in terms of large companies such as ourselves using it. And so I think, if you agree with the first point, then I think you're interested in, you know, working with other companies that are working with this or just being part of this community. In fact, we just talked to a very young company the other day that was kind of doing something very similar to what we're doing in one of our teams. And I think we'll probably end up striking up an interesting partnership on this, mainly based on the fact that we both use Flutter. So, I think there's some momentum there that is uh, is an interesting thing to be a part of. And I guess the third thing is I think there's probably going to be some interesting things that come out of just this community that this might not be kind of the technology of choice for 10 years, but it might set up sort of the next evolution in this whole discussion around sort of ways to create awesome mobile apps more quickly. And so I just think it's kind of an interesting sort of, I guess, sort of segment of the sort of broader technology landscape to be involved in.
No, I think those are some good points. Yeah, I mean, is there anything else you wanted to say before we sign off?
I mean, if you're a developer and you're interested in working with Nubank or interested in working at Nubank, definitely look us up. We're always looking to hire people and product managers too.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Can't help but put in like a shameless plug
No, it's
for
okay. There's
for the
actually
company.
there's tons of people looking for jobs out there. So if you're hiring and you're willing to try people out, yeah. I think Flutter's definitely bringing a lot of interesting.
Nubank.com.br.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting talent out there that people are all getting into programming recently because of the pandemic, right? So, and Flutter is a great.
Well, and especially if you like working with Flutter, then please join us. We'd love to have you.
Yeah, Flutter is really a great piece of technology that is pretty easy to grasp to get into. I think compared to others, maybe probably easier than Clojure, I think.
Probably a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. Again, thanks for your time, and yeah, maybe we'll talk again in the future after you guys, maybe have a little bit. Maybe there's could be a postmortem 5 years later. You guys will maybe say, "Oh man, maybe we're changing again, or we're not happy, or maybe we're super happy." I don't know. Just curious what will happen in the future.
Yeah, so are we.
All right. Thanks again.